The party planner called me the morning of my son's big anniversary gala, and her voice was tight. "Mr. Vance? I'm calling about tonight. Your son gave me a seating list, and I wanted to confirm he has you at the very back table, by the service door. He said you'd prefer it. And he asked me to make sure you don't, and I'm quoting him, talk to the important guests about the shed." She paused. "I also have a note here. One guest requested a private moment on arrival. He asked specifically for a Mr. Barrett Vance. That's you, isn't it?" I stood in my workshop, sawdust on my hands, and I knew exactly who was coming. And I knew my son had no idea what he'd just walked into. Welcome back to The Forgotten Father. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every chance to do right by the ones who raised them. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to want to stay till the end. My name is Barrett Vance. I am 74 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, in a house with a workshop out back that's older than my marriage. I drive a 1997 Chevy pickup with sawdust permanently in the seams of the seats. I wear flannel, and I have a scar on my left thumb from 1981 that I earned honestly. I am a woodworker. That's what most people see. An old man who makes things in a shed. If you drove past my place, you'd think, there's a fellow who never amounted to much. That's fine. I've let the whole world think that for 50 years. But I want to tell you a secret, and you'll need it before this story is done, so hold on to it. I don't make furniture. I make guitars. Not ordinary ones. I am a luthier, one of maybe a handful of true masters left alive, and the instruments that come out of that shed are played by people whose names you would know instantly. I have built guitars for legends. Quietly, anonymously, most of the time, because the great ones like to keep their secrets, and so do I. There is a sound that certain famous songs have, a warmth you feel in your chest, and more often than you'd guess, that sound came out of a shed in Asheville, out of these scarred old hands. I never told my son. He never asked. And that, right there, is the whole story. Let me tell you about my son. His name is Preston. He's 48. Preston went into finance and did well, and somewhere along the way he decided that a father who works with his hands is an embarrassment to be managed. He wears watches that cost more than my truck. He lives in a glass house on a hill, and for as long as I can remember, when anyone asks what his father does, Preston says, "Oh, he tinkers. Woodworking, a little hobby thing." A hobby. 50 years of mastery reduced to a hobby, because the truth didn't fit the image my son wanted people to have of where he came from. I raised Preston mostly alone. His mother, my Ellen, died when he was 14. Breast cancer, fast and cruel, and I did my best, a sawdust-covered man trying to raise a grieving boy, and I know I got a lot of it wrong. But I never missed a game. I never missed a recital. And every dollar that sent him to his fancy school came out of guitars I built at 2 in the morning after he was asleep. He wore good shoes because I sanded necks until my hands cramped. He never knew. I never told him. I thought the work should speak for itself. I have learned, too late, that work doesn't speak. People have to be told. And I never told my boy where his shoes came from. Let me tell you how it started. Because it explains everything. I grew up with nothing. My father drank. My mother worked 2 jobs. We were poor in the way that marks you. When I was 15, an old man named Silas ran a repair shop in town. He caught me staring in his window at the instruments. He didn't chase me off. He waved me in. He handed me a block of maple and a chisel. He said, "Let's see what's in there." Nobody had ever bet on me before. Not once. Silas taught me everything. For free. On his own time. He never had children. He said I was the closest thing. When he died, he left me his tools. And a note. It said one line. Bet on the next one, Barrett. I have spent 50 years keeping that promise. Cash Delaney was one of the ones I bet on. There were others. That's the whole engine of my life. An old man believed in a poor boy. So I believe in poor boys. It's the only way anything good has ever happened in this world. I met Ellen in 1971. She came into the shop to buy a ukulele for her niece. She stayed an hour and bought nothing. She came back the next day, and the next. She married a man with sawdust in his hair and no money in the bank, and she never once asked me to be anything else. She was the only person who knew what I really was. She'd sit in the shed on cold nights with a blanket and a thermos and just watch me work. She never needed me to be famous. She said, "The wood knows what you are, Barrett. That's enough." When she died, I put a curl of her favorite rosewood in her hands before they closed the casket. I still can't smell rosewood without seeing her face. She's the reason I kept the shed. It's the last place we were happy together. Preston was throwing a party, his 20th wedding anniversary, a huge affair at a country club, hundreds of guests, the kind of people he'd spent his life trying to impress. He invited me almost as an afterthought. "Dad, it's black tie. Do you own a suit? Just keep it low-key, okay? These are serious people." I said I'd behave. I could hear the relief in his voice that I'd agreed to be small. What Preston didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that one of the serious people on his guest list was a man named Cash Delaney. If you've turned on a radio in the last 40 years, you know that name. Rock and roll royalty. Sold-out stadiums, songs that raised a generation. Cash was a friend of one of Preston's business partners, and he'd been invited as the celebrity trophy of the evening, the big name Preston could brag about landing. Preston was over the moon about it. He told everyone Cash Delaney was coming. What Preston did not know is why Cash accepted. He didn't come for Preston. He saw a name on the guest list, Vance, and he made a phone call to the party planner that morning. "If you've made it this far, do me one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. Now let me tell you about Cash and me." It was 1979. Cash Delaney was a nobody then. A skinny kid with a broken guitar and a voice like gravel and honey, playing bars for tips, sleeping in his car. He came to my shop, back when I had a little storefront, holding a guitar that had been run over. Literally, the neck was snapped, the body cracked. It was the only thing he owned that mattered, and he couldn't afford to fix it, let alone replace it. He asked if I could do anything. I looked at that broken guitar, and I looked at that hungry kid, and something in me said this one matters. So I told him a lie. I told him I had a repair loaner he could use while I fixed his. And I handed him a guitar I'd built with my own hands. My best work. Not a loaner. I just gave it to him and let him think it was temporary. That guitar became famous. Cash wrote his first 3 albums on it. It's the guitar on the cover of the record that made him a star. He played it for 15 years before it went into a museum, and for the whole first year he thought it was a loaner, until he came back to return it and I told him the truth. That there was never a broken guitar to fix. That I'd just given him mine, because I heard something in him worth betting on. He wept, a grown man in my shop, and he tried to pay me, and I wouldn't take it. I told him the same thing I always tell the ones I believe in. Somebody bet on me once. Now I bet on you. Go be worth it. He named me in every liner note for 40 years. Most people thought B. Vance was a company. It was a shed in Asheville and an old man who never told his own son. Cash and I stayed close, in the quiet way that real friendships live. He'd call on Ellen's birthday because he'd met her once and never forgot her kindness. He knew about Preston. He knew my boy was ashamed of me, though he never said it that plainly. And when Cash saw the name Vance on the guest list for a gala in Asheville, he knew. And he made his plan. The night of the party, I put on my one suit, the gray one I bought for Ellen's funeral, and I drove my dusty truck to my son's beautiful gala. Preston met me at the door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He steered me toward the back. Table 19, Dad, by the door. It's easier for you to slip out early if you get tired. Table 19 was where they'd seated the club staff's families and the vendors. I understood. I was being stored. I sat down, and a kind young waiter brought me a ginger ale, and I folded my hands, and I waited. Because I knew something the whole room didn't. I knew who was about to arrive. I heard it before I saw it. A ripple through the crowd, a rising murmur, the particular electricity of a famous person entering a room. Cash Delaney had arrived. Preston practically sprinted to the door, beaming, hand out, ready for his photograph with the legend. Cash shook his hand politely, and then Cash Delaney, in front of 300 of the most important people my son had ever gathered, looked past Preston, scanned the room, and said into the sudden hush, "Before I do anything else tonight, I need to see an old friend." "Where's Barrett?" Preston's smile froze. "Barrett?" he said. "You mean my father?" "Barrett's my father." And Cash's face changed. He looked at Preston, really looked at him, and he said, slowly, "Your father. Barrett Vance is your father. And you've got him where?" The room had gone completely silent now, every head turning. And Preston, trapped, gestured vaguely toward the back, toward table 19, toward the service door. Cash Delaney walked the entire length of that ballroom, past the head table, past the mayor, past every serious person my son had wanted to impress, all the way to the back, to the old man in the funeral suit by the service door. And this rock and roll legend, this man who'd played for Kings, stopped in front of me, and his eyes were wet, and he said, loud enough for the whole silent room to hear, "Barrett Vance, the greatest guitar maker who ever lived. And they sat you by the door." He pulled me up out of my chair and wrapped me in a hug, and he held on, and into my ear he whispered, Ellen would have whooped him for this. I laughed, and I cried at the same time. Then Cash turned to face the room, keeping one arm around my shoulders, and he did the thing I will be grateful for as long as I live. "I want to tell all you serious people something," Cash said, and his stage voice filled the hall. "You came tonight to be near me, but you should have come to be near him. This man doesn't tinker in a shed. This man is the reason half the music you love sounds the way it does. That guitar on my first album, the one in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, he built it. He gave it to me when I was a starving kid with nothing, and he asked for nothing back. There are legends in this room's record collections that were born in Barrett Vance's hands. He is, without exaggeration, one of the greatest craftsmen alive in America today." Cash looked at Preston then, and his own son just told me his father tinkers, and sat him by the kitchen. I want to tell you what went through me, standing there, held up by a legend in front of that silent room. It wasn't triumph. I'll be honest with you. It was grief. 50 years of it, all at once. Because I looked at all those faces turning to stare, finally seeing me, and the only thought in my head was, Ellen should be here. She's the one who believed it out loud when nobody else would. She's the one who deserved to watch this. Not me. I don't need a room to clap. I never did. But she did. She spent her whole life defending a man the world called small, and she died before the world found out she was right. I felt her there anyway. I felt her hand on my back, the way it used to be on the cold nights in the shed, and I heard her, plain as morning, say, "Told you, Barrett." The wood always knew. I had to blink hard to stay standing. An old craftsman does not weep in front of 300 people. But it was close. It was very close. You spend a life being invisible on purpose. You tell yourself the work is enough. And most days it is. The wood doesn't care if you're famous, but I will not lie to you. It meant something, standing in that room, to finally be seen. Not pitied, not managed, not tucked by the service door. Seen, every person deserves that once before they go. Even the quiet ones. Especially the quiet ones in the shed. I found my son's face in the crowd. Preston had gone white as paper. He was staring at me like he'd never seen me before, and in a way, he never had. He'd decided who I was when he was a teenager, and he'd stopped looking, and now, in front of everyone he'd ever wanted to impress, he was finding out that the man he'd been ashamed of his whole life was the most remarkable person in the room. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Now, I want to tell you what I did next. Because you might want me to let him twist, to savor it. And I understand. But that's not who Ellen and I raised, even if the boy forgot it. I stepped away from Cash, and I walked over to my son, through that silent, staring crowd, and I put my scarred old hand on his shoulder. And I said, quietly, just for him, "It's all right, Preston. You didn't know, because I never told you. That's on me as much as you." His face crumpled. "Dad," he whispered, "why didn't you ever tell me, all these years? Why did you let me think?" And there it was. The real wound, laid bare in front of everyone. I looked at my boy and I told him the truth I'd carried for 50 years. Because I thought the work would speak for me, son. I thought if I just did good work, quietly, you'd see it. I was wrong. I should have brought you into the shed when you were small and shown you what your father's hands could do. I should have told you where your shoes came from. I'm sorry I let you be ashamed of me. That was my failure, not yours. Preston put his face in his hands at his own anniversary gala in front of everyone, and he wept like the 14-year-old boy who'd lost his mother. I held him. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is stand there while they finally see clearly. There was one person at that party who wasn't surprised by any of it. My granddaughter, Preston's daughter, Ava. She's 19, and Ava was the only one in the family who'd ever come out to the shed. Since she was little, she'd sit on a stool and watch me bend wood and string necks. And she never once thought it was small. She'd told her father for years that Grandpa was an artist. He never listened. When Cash walked to the back of that room, Ava was already on her feet, already crying, already halfway to me. She got to me before Cash finished speaking and threw her arms around my neck and said the thing I'll keep forever. "I told them, Grandpa, I always told them what you were. They just never wanted to hear it. Out of my whole family, the child who saw me clearly was the one who bothered to sit in the shed and watch. That's the whole secret if you want it. Go sit in the shed. Watch the quiet ones work. They are almost always building something magnificent while the world calls it a hobby." I did not punish Preston. There was nothing to punish. He humiliated himself far more thoroughly than I ever could have, and the lesson landed deeper than any revenge. But things changed after that night. The next Saturday, for the first time in his adult life, my son drove to my house, and he didn't call first, and he walked out to the shed and he stood in the doorway and he said, "Dad, will you show me? What you do? I want to understand." And I did. I put a piece of rosewood in his soft banker's hands and I taught him to feel the grain. He's terrible at it, but he keeps coming back. He comes every few weeks now. He's learning. Not to be a luthier. To know his father before it's too late. Cash comes by when he's in town. Two old men in a shed, arguing about wood and telling lies about the 70s. He's got a foundation now that pays for instruments and lessons for poor kids with talent, and he named it after me, the B. Vance Foundation, and this time everyone knows it's a person, and the person is a shed in Asheville. Ava's studying instrument design at a conservatory. She's going to inherit the shop, and the hands, and the whole quiet legacy. She already builds a better mandolin than most people twice her age. She's proof it was all worth it. I still work in the shed most days. I still drive the dusty truck. My hands don't move as fast as they used to, but they still know things that can't be taught, only earned. There's a guitar hanging on my wall that I'm building for no one in particular, just to keep the old knowledge alive. Some mornings Preston sits on Ava's old stool and watches, the way she used to, the way he never did as a boy. "Better late than never," Ellen would say. She'd be right. Here's what I want to leave you with, and then I'll let you go. The world is full of people it has decided are small. The tinkerer, the whittler, the old man in the shed. And nearly every one of them is holding a mastery you cannot see from the outside, a whole silent life of making beautiful things that never asked for applause. Do not measure a person by the dust on their clothes or the age of their truck. My son did that for 40 years, and he almost missed knowing that his father was one of the great craftsmen in America. Don't wait for a rock legend to walk across the room and tell you who your father is. Walk out to the shed yourself and ask him to show you what his hands can do. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this family.